All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into a really powerful framework for thinking about social change, and it comes from the brilliant sociologist Eric Olin Wright. We're going to unpack the core ideas from his final work, How to Be an Anti-Capitalist in the 21st Century, and see how this gives us a totally new lens for understanding modern society, with a special focus on Taiwan. So let's kick things off with a question that's, well, kind of huge. When you look at the world around you, and you see things that just don't seem right, massive inequality, people feeling powerless, communities falling apart, what do you do? I mean, how do you even begin to change a system as big and tangled as capitalism? It's a question people have been wrestling with for centuries. And this is where Eric Olin Wright comes in with a fascinating and maybe even surprising answer. He says, forget about the old idea of a single violent revolution to smash the system. Instead, he argues for a different path entirely, a much smarter, steadier process of eroding it from the inside out. And that one simple word, erode, it changes everything. Okay, so let's get into his toolkit. Before you can even talk about changing a system, Wright argues that you have to start with a moral compass. You've got to be absolutely clear on the values you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against. This is the foundation, and everything else he proposes is built right on top of it. He grounds his entire critique in three big values, which you might recognize as echoes of the French Revolution. First up, equality and fairness. Now, this isn't about making everyone identical. It's about making sure everyone has real access to what they need to live a flourishing life. Second, democracy and freedom, the idea that people should have a meaningful say in the big decisions that affect them. And finally, community and solidarity, which is about building a society based on cooperation and taking care of each other, not just cutthroat competition. So once he's laid out these values, this is where it gets really clever. Wright uses these three ideals almost like a doctor's diagnostic kit. He holds them up against capitalism as it exists today and identifies what he calls its three fundamental deficits, the ways the system just structurally fails to live up to these goals. So first, there's the equality deficit. The ideal? Everyone gets a fair shot. But the reality, Wright argues, is that capitalism is basically an inequality-enhancing machine. Its whole logic is built on class exploitation, where the wealth of the few is directly connected to the labor and insecurity of the many. And that's not some accidental bug you see. According to Wright, it's a feature that's baked right into the system's DNA. Second, the democracy deficit. We all say we value freedom, but how much do we really have? Wright points out that huge economic decisions, like a corporation deciding to shut down a factory, which can absolutely devastate a community, are treated as private choices, totally outside of any democratic control. And if you look inside most workplaces, he says they often operate like little dictatorships, where employees have almost no real voice. That's a huge lack of what he calls real freedom. And third, the community and solidarity deficit. The ideal is a society where we work together out of mutual concern. But the reality of a market-driven culture is that it often runs on what the philosopher G.A. Cohen famously called greed and fear. It encourages us to see each other as competitors, it promotes individualism, and that ultimately fragments our society, making it incredibly hard to come together and solve big problems. Okay, so that's the diagnosis. Sounds a little bleak, right? So what's the prescription? What do we actually do about it? This is where we get to the heart of Wright's strategic vision, and it's not about finding one magic bullet, but about using a whole combination of smart strategies. Wright looks back at 5 different historical strategies. Right off the bat, he takes smashing capitalism through a violent revolution off the table. He sees it as a 20th century fantasy that too often just swapped one kind of oppression for another. And while taming it with regulations is vital, those rules can be rolled back with the next election. So instead, he focuses on a powerful combination of the other 3: dismantling, resisting, and escaping. These are strategies that work together, from the top down and the bottom up. And this brings us to his absolute core idea, the central metaphor for his whole strategy. He asks us to stop seeing the economy as one giant building you have to knock down. Instead, picture it as an ecosystem. Right now, capitalism is like this massive, dominant tree that blocks out the sun for everything else. The goal isn't to chop it down in one go. The goal is to plant and grow other kinds of economic life in the cracks and spaces until the whole forest starts to transform. So how does this erosion actually happen? Wright says it's a 2-pronged attack, happening at the same time. First, you've got symbiotic transformation. That's the top-down approach. It's about using state power to tame the worst parts of capitalism and to create laws and funding that help alternatives grow. Then, at the very same time, you have interstitial transformation. That's the bottom-up, grassroots work of building alternative things like co-ops, community projects, and nonprofits that just operate on a completely different set of rules. Now, this is great as a theory, but what makes it so powerful is that it's a tool you can actually use to understand what's happening in the world. So let's put it to the test. Let's use this framework as a lens to look at a real place, Taiwan. It's a society that has seen incredible change, and it faces a really unique set of challenges that Wright's ideas help bring into sharp focus. So to get our bearings on Taiwan with Wright's ideas, let's start with this number, 10. What's that about? Well, back in 2016, The Economist magazine ranked Taiwan 10th in the world on its crony capitalism index. That's basically a measure of how much of a country's wealth is concentrated in industries where there are super cozy relationships between big business and the government. It's a huge red flag for that democracy deficit we were just talking about. And that one data point is really a doorway into seeing all three of Wright's deficits playing out in the real world. You see the equality deficit in the rise of the working poor, especially among young people who are often stuck in insecure temporary jobs. You see the democracy deficit in that very cronyism, where powerful private interests can end up calling the shots over the public good. And you see the solidarity deficit in what some analysts have called Taiwan's unfinished left, a labor movement that's often fragmented, which makes it hard to build broad collective power. But here's where the analysis gets really interesting and, frankly, hopeful. Wright's framework suggests that in a place like Taiwan, the most powerful engine for change might not be the old-school idea of class struggle. Instead, it could be alliances that are built around shared values. We saw a perfect example of this with the huge sunflower movement. It wasn't just one class of people. It brought together students, activists, and regular citizens from all walks of life, all united by a shared belief in democracy and fairness. That is a perfect example of building solidarity beyond the factory floor. So if that's the path forward, building these kinds of value-driven movements, what does that future actually look like? If the big goal is to erode capitalism's total dominance, what are the seeds we can start planting right now? Well, Wright gives us a kind of blueprint for what that new economic ecosystem could look like. The vision isn't about replacing one single system with another single system. No, it's about creating a much more diverse, pluralistic economy. Capitalism might still be the biggest slice of the pie, but its dominance is shrinking. Other sectors, like a cooperative economy made up of worker-owned businesses, a vibrant social economy of nonprofits, and a strong public sector, they all grow and become much more important parts of the whole. And Wright gives us a whole toolkit of concrete ideas to help build this. We're talking about things like an unconditional basic income, which would give people like those young working poor in Taiwan the real freedom to say no to bad jobs. It means actively funding and supporting co-ops and worker-owned businesses. It means expanding the social economy. It even means democratizing big corporations from the inside by giving workers actual seats and real power on company boards. It's all about building the institutions of economic democracy, one piece at a time. And really, this quote from Wright himself just sums it all up so perfectly. This isn't some pie-in-the-sky fantasy. Wright was a total pragmatist. He truly believed that the building blocks for a better, more democratic world are already here. They're all around us, in the little experiments and alternative organizations that people are creating every single day. The big challenge, he says, is to figure out how to connect them, grow them, and protect them. And that brings it all back to us, doesn't it? It leaves us with one final question to think about. Instead of getting overwhelmed by the idea of changing a massive global system, what if we started smaller? What if we just looked around our own neighborhoods, our own communities, and asked, what's one thing we could build here? A community garden? A worker co-op? A tool-sharing library? Anything that strengthens fairness, democracy, or solidarity. Because according to Eric Olin Wright, that is how you start building a new world, right inside the shell of the old one. Thanks for tuning in.